Hi, everyone. This is Jackie Cooper with the GBA Talk Show, and we actually are on a whole new recording platform we're using for our GBA Talk Show. We're using StreamYard, so if you're not familiar with it, definitely check it out. And we are actually this year in 2025, we're rebranding our GBA Talk Show, and we are calling it the Spotlight Talk Show because we're going to be spotlighting members from the GBA, which is the Government Blockchain Association, from all around the world. And today I have Ryann on, which I will speak with in just a quick moment. For those that do not know anything about the Government Blockchain Association, you really need to go to its website, which is gbaglobal.org, and check it out, because we have individuals who are from around the world who are members of the GBA, and there are working groups that you can get involved in to learn more about a variety of topics. And even if you're a newbie or more experienced, we have different virtual and in-person events, and we welcome all new members. But today we are going to be spotlighting Ryann and everything that he's been doing over the past few years, because his background is really diverse. It involves not just the policy side, but the tech side. And so, Ryann, I welcome you to the Spotlight Talk Show. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you, Jackie. Really excited to be here and really appreciate the opportunity to share the work that we've all been doing.
Yeah, no, the Government Blockchain Association sheds light on the applications and the use of innovative tech. And how did you get into the Web3 space? What was your first kind of entry in? Was it through Bitcoin? Was it through Web3, AI? Actually, AI it just has become trendy now.
Yeah. Funny enough, I remember working with a friend in high school on a text parsing, which is probably early AI type stuff. But no, in 2011, I think, is when I learned about Bitcoin. Was just starting a job at a startup, reselling network equipment, and we tried to get the CEO to pay attention. He didn't care. But my friend and I really dug in and just both became kind of students of the technology. There were certain things about it that just made so much sense to me. I'd been, definitely a student of what was going on in the world in 2008, 2009 during Occupy Wall Street and the financial crisis that occurred then. And so seeing what Bitcoin was immediately made sense, but it took me a while, one, to actually have something to invest in it, and two, to really do the research on the technology to feel confident that it really was going to last. And it was probably about 2013 when I got vested in it enough to really start paying more and more attention to the broader market. And it always struck me that, one Satoshi didn't have to represent a necessarily a unit of account in terms of money, but it could also represent an anchor point for anything that you want to hold as truth or fact, or record something for perpetuity. And so that concept was in my mind long before I saw Ethereum and smart contracts come to fruition. There were some older ones like Counterparty and OmniChain that were trying to do that stuff. That it always made sense to me that this idea of a triple entry public ledger that operates on a consensus model and has this unique kind of ballet of incentives going on to keep all the parties working together, even if they may be adversarial at times. So those are kind of the core things that really struck me, and I just was inspired to share it and tell people about it, and started giving some salespeople that worked for me at the time a little bit of Bitcoin when they did a good job, and it sort of spiraled from there.
You have dropped so many weird words that for those that are new to this area, they're probably thinking, OMG. So let's kind of backtrack a little bit. First of all, explain the difference in lay terms, the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum, because you mentioned them. And, again, I'm going to let you kind of take the reign here of descriptions, but how would you describe the difference between them?
Well, without going too into the technical weeds, one key thing is the governance model, right? The way Bitcoin is governed between node operators and the code management and even the supply and the issuance policy of how Bitcoin is released into circulation are all very different from Ethereum. Ethereum really came into place addressing some some demand for computational functionality, which actually existed in Bitcoin early on, but was taken out for security to prevent certain exploits from happening that could happen, that did happen before it was big enough for it to matter. And so Ethereum wanted to do those things, but there were key differences in the mechanisms of how that code could be observed and enacted. And so Ethereum started to address those things, but also has a very different method of sort of paying fees and managing those fees and how it operates. And it's a challenge to balance the money system with a compute system. And there's certainly a lot of really innovative things out there now that are taking all different approaches. But those are some of the key differences that struck me that always kind of made me see the difference between the sort of store of value concept, the hard money concept of Bitcoin versus this more enterprise catered type of solution that Ethereum was developing. And I could also see, frankly, very early on, lots of enterprises with like the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance getting involved and having their influence. And so it always just struck me as a distinction, not to say one's better than the other, but that there are very, very key distinctions in all of these characteristics that involve, a blockchain and their cryptocurrency and how they operate.
So another word that you spoke about that individuals who might be new to this area might not understand fully is, what does consensus mean in this regard?
Yeah, that's a good question. Consensus is, what we all do when we vote, right? We come to some kind of consensus about how we want things to run. And so, in the Bitcoin sphere, the way code is released is, they can write the updates all they want, but the miners that are running the base code, the node operators that are running that code have to actually adopt that code and signal that they are accepting the update. And so different updates might have different thresholds. One update might have a 60% threshold, another update might have a 90% threshold. And so those thresholds are the threshold for consensus to be observed for that particular update or change. And so it's really however you want to define what you think is good enough to say the majority of people or enough people think we should do it this way, and then proceeding to do it the way that has been indicated. So
is your background tech, or what's your background? Because again, my background is law and education, but I have, learning the tech side. So what's your background?
So I was into building computers and computer programming in middle school and into high school. And then I dropped out of high school because I was pretty frustrated with what I'll call the industrialized education system.
Yes.
And from there, I was interested in going to college. Seemed like I should do it. I had a lot of ideas from the computer tech and coding background about what I thought education should look like. I went to college for computer programming and child psychology. That lasted about 7 weeks, and I dropped out again. And, fast forward, I do still advise for an ed tech company, and really what I envisioned at the time was what advertising does to us today, right? It tracks what we're doing all the time. It puts up the things we might be interested in. And there's somebody somewhere behind the scenes kind of directing that stuff. I envisioned a little bit more of a hands-on sort of educational advisor, but taking our experience with content and advertising, things that are catered to our interests, and somebody guiding that journey of education along it. Still waiting to see that happen. I have my own kids in school now and still a little frustrated with the system. But from there, I worked at worked in a tech department for an insurance company. Then sort of realized I didn't really want to be in an office. I was too young for that. And I started working with kids with post-traumatic stress, did that for a few years, along with snowboarding, taught snowboarding for 17 years, some of that full-time, some of that part-time. Had my insurance, life, health, and annuities license at one point. Always had an interest in finance and trading, and had some investments, but then when I had my kids, I cashed them out to pay bills. Later on, I went to... At one point, I went to South America, learned to speak some Spanish, and still practice that today. Encouraging my kids to be trilingual or polyglots. And then, I sort of settled down and, after the experience of the tech company, which, they actually, I didn't have any equity, but that was a complete startup. I was the first 5 employees. They were scaled to about 15 million a year in revenue when I left. And then I pivoted and went into automotive finance. And so that's where I kind of got some more business chops and finance experience working with banks. And then ultimately ended up having an opportunity provided by Bitcoin to pursue my own interests. And that's when I started heavily networking in the blockchain space, getting to know the legal folks, the legislators, the other activists around the state, and finding out what the corporate interests were in blockchain legislation. And I got involved in what became Act 205 in Vermont in 2018. And that was a bill that was passed into law that created a blockchain-based limited liability corporation, which in my mind, the key feature of that was a typical LLC only provides liability protection to the stated members when you register it. And this blockchain LLC extended that liability protection to identified participants. So in a dynamic fashion, it worked with a blockchain sort of functional company. It's been minimally utilized, but there are a number, and I'll actually be interviewing one of those folks later on. And the other piece of that law was an enablement of a personal information protection company that established the concept of fiduciary responsibility around personal data. So fiduciary responsibility being the same responsibility that a wealth manager has when they're managing your stocks or bonds or other assets. The concept is we should treat data the same way. And so it opened that door. Again, minimally utilized, but that path has continued. And I did pivot out of self-employment as I ran out of Bitcoin and got into infrastructure, fiber and data center infrastructure. And so that's what I've been doing for a while, but continued this dialogue, this inviting people to the conversation in Vermont and influencing the laws still. We got the concept of parametric contracts included in Vermont captive insurance laws, and then further updated for clarity just last year. And I think that's a huge opportunity. And parametrics being, a contract that observes facts on the ground and then enacts whatever those conditions are. So can be a smart contract, but not necessarily. But that's an open door, in my opinion, for companies to really start exercising blockchain tools and functionality within corporate and within the corporate world, starting with captive entities.
So go back again. I'm all about vocabulary building because being in education, we want to make sure everyone understands. Because when I first started in the blockchain space about 10 years ago, and because of my background in law, I thought smart contracts, what are we putting on paper? So explain to everyone who's listening, what does a smart contract mean with respect to a blockchain and technology?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, so that's one of the things that Ethereum started, right? That was the key differentiator, was Ethereum created this programmability. And that programmability, it's not so different from the law, right? If, then, else. That's a key concept in coding. That's long before coding existed. That's what the law is. If this happened, then this happens. And maybe if there's a different condition, something else happens.
Exactly.
So that concept is how code works. And a smart contract is the idea of having this code on a blockchain and then able to respond and react in near real time, responsively, to whatever conditions. So the earliest smart contracts, one that I think of that might have actually been on Bitcoin before they got rid of those opcodes, was the SHA-1, the SHA-1 encryption security, which is much weaker than SHA-256. But someone created a little pot of gold in a contract that if you could prove that you had cracked SHA-1, it would release the payment to whoever proved it. Right. And so that simple concept of if this, then this happens is the sort of underlying concept of any code. And the smart contract reference is referring to that being on a blockchain in a decentralized format and operating sort of ongoing in real time, waiting for people to meet the conditions of those contracts.
Very cool. So I'm going to ask you about the insurance in a second, but how did you learn about the Government Blockchain Association? How did you learn about GBA?
Yeah, it must have been 2017, and it might have been somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn, or someone I knew referred me to somebody on LinkedIn, and got into a conversation. At the time, they were looking for chapter leaders, people that would host an event every month. And I was already hosting weekly entrepreneur-focused meetups at a co-work space. And so I said, yeah, sure, that sounds great. I'll start, leading the conversation. And, they started off providing some slides for me to work off of a theme of each month, different topics. And I did some of those in person, some of those remote. I did one or two in the Vermont State House, which is a unique feature of Vermont, that we still have citizen access to our State House. And just continued in the conversation. And I joined the working groups for the standards working group, the healthcare working group, probably in a few others, but those are kind of the two that have really been my focal points in the activities within the GBA.
So, what are you doing with respect to insurance, and does that tie in with the GBA, or is that kind of different?
Yeah, so I'm hoping it ties in more and more with the GBA. I have joined the insurance working group, and I'm talking about some folks getting that going a little bit more actively. One key thing is the difference between,
Okay. So he's going to hop back on in a quick second. And as he hops on, we will continue. Hold on, let me add him back.
I'm back.
It happens. Tech happens. Trust me.
So the key differentiator is between captive and commercial insurance is captive insurance typically originally is sole owned, right? It's a company insuring themselves. So it's not something you or I typically have access to. It's something very, very wealthy companies have access to, and it's a way for them to not pay the profits or the shareholders of a commercial insurance company. And it also opens them up for efficiency in the management of claims and premium processing, as well as any other efficiency they can get from technology or just handling those things internally, so that the profits go to them. But the flip side of that is that those profits are held within the captive and still need to be deployed within the sort of overall mission of the captive. So, for example, if the captive is doing workers' comp, then that profit needs to basically go back toward safety, mitigation, things that like hard hats, steel toe boots, so stipends for things like that, or education to make workers safer. This all came, long before technology. This is something that was probably born in the UK and Bermuda with shipping companies, right? Because they're international, and sometimes they'd have big investors, but they'd want to figure out ways to mitigate paying the profits to the insurance companies. So that's where it kind of started. And then Wyoming passed some legislation for it, but it didn't exactly take off. Vermont kind of recognized the potential of tapping into all these other industries of insurance with captive. They passed similar legislation, but they also passed a little bit of funding to get the association started. And that association is what really made it successful in attracting companies to come explore this concept and start building their captives within the state of Vermont as a domicile. And now fast forward, this is why most healthcare insurance with your employer covers things like chiropractic, because a company had their captive. They decided, hey, we think if we cover this, that our employees will be happier and healthier. And then over time, they prove that out, which creates the tables, the actuarial tables that allow commercial insurance companies to create a commercial product. Bigger picture now, there's concepts like group captives and sponsored captives, and there's a whole bunch of other sort of types of captives now that reduce that cost for the individual participant, because it can be $500,000 or more just to start a captive, just in expenses and fees. And then you got to backstop it with a lot of capital. So group captives can bring that burden down for a group of companies. Sponsored captives can create sort of cookie cutters out of an existing captive, so that smaller companies can engage in a captive that fits their particular business, like auto dealers. There's a pretty substantial auto dealers association that operates a captive, and really is what makes auto dealers still able to make a profit nowadays, because there was a time when they started to get pushed out of the profit by the insurance companies. And insurance companies were saying, oh, you have to have all this insurance. They wouldn't give them the options. And so captive insurance provides that flexibility under the state regulators' oversight in Vermont. And then the other interesting thing about Vermont is we've become the global leader, the most assets under management in domiciles in Vermont. And our captive association, the Vermont Captive Insurance Association, is the only one that I know of still that has representation in Washington, D.C. also. So oftentimes the laws in Vermont predate the laws in other states because they'll sort of get their guidance from the things that work and the things that don't work that Vermont's doing.
So do you see that this idea of the captive can be applied, or maybe it already is in development, to the cryptocurrency space or to the blockchain business Web3 space? Where do you see it being applied, either now or down the road?
Yeah, well, there's certain things I can only speculate on in terms of what's already happening because it is pretty quiet. And the companies that are using blockchain to benefit their risk mitigation interests aren't necessarily advertising it. One that comes to mind, though, is Walmart. There were projects a long time ago, and I could guess that those projects actually happened within or adjacent to their captive operations because the whole purpose is mitigating risk. Food supply chains. There's companies I've spoken with in the past in 2017 that were already for years utilizing blockchain to create those ledgers between their suppliers, their vendors, their transporters in order to keep track of the way the food is taken care of and how it's sourced so that they know that what they got to begin with is what they're getting. And if it was meat, it didn't get too warm in the process, all those kinds of factors. So I can speculate on what is because I can understand like a little bit that I know and understand how it applies, but it's not necessarily anything that anyone cares about the publicity on. What they care about is knowing that their food gets there safely, right?
Exactly.
Walmart cares about being able to claim that, they got XYZ from, sustainable sources. But I do know that the captive companies and their representatives were the ones that were side by side with me in the State House getting this blockchain legislation passed, and they were supportive of these concepts, and they've continued to be supportive with the addition of parametric contract language to the laws. So they recognize the opportunity there. I've also seen a couple recent new members of blockchain associations that are pretty big insurance companies. I won't drop names, but that's another indication that they recognize this is technology to mitigate risks, to disintermediate transactions. And it, only stands to reason that they all have presence in Vermont because they all want to serve this captive industry. And by all, I mean 20 of them, right? It's a pretty small circle when it comes down to it. And that also has an outsized impact on the state as a state and its residents, even though they don't know about it. In 2023, I think the number was like $32 million to the state general fund coming from the captive industry. That's a pretty significant portion of a state with 650,000 residents.
Yeah. So with the Government Blockchain Association, with your being in a state that's doing different things, do you want to talk about how you'd like to grow that presence in your state, and how people can reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. My first call out is always to our legislators and our public servants and those of you who are just citizens. Even if you're not part of the GBA, you can expect your leaders to get this knowledge and go join the GBA because it's free for them, and they can just be a fly on the wall to the working group that applies to whatever they're interested in, and they can start to gain some knowledge. And there's a ton of free training available through the GBA. So I always have a call out to citizens to realize, like, no matter how much or little you know about this is a free resource to your leaders. So insist that everyone from whether it's a town clerk or the president or a governor or legislator or any military personnel, they can get this access to this resource. Myself, I have interchainvt.com. That's interchainvt.com. And that can be kind of a landing place. I'm really trying to show Web3 to Vermont citizens and show Vermont to Web3 citizens, and share some of the resources. And then from there, you can probably find some of the other things, my blog, my YouTube channel, and the podcasting that we're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And for, those that are listening to this talk show, definitely hop over to the GBA's YouTube, because our video will also be on the GBA YouTube, and as well as, my various socials, both for Crypto Mom 2 and Blockchain Legal Institute. But any other thoughts before we wrap up, on how you're supporting the blockchain Web3 community, networking with various GBA members, or events that are coming up? What should people know?
Yeah, stay tuned for all the recordings, Jackie's doing, that GBA is doing, that I'm doing. The Vermont Captive Insurance Association conference attracts 1,500 or more people from around the world to Vermont in the summertime. I'm not sure if there's a date set yet, but it's in August. So that'll be something that I'll have my eyes on. And I am positioning my company to be a conduit for other companies, Web3 companies, that want to get into this conversation. And so it can be a steep ticket to join as a member and go and actually get to these conferences. So if I can find those collaborators that can get behind me and my team, and we can put those names and labels in front of that community to help them recognize where the resources are in this space, where they can get the education, that's something that I definitely, want to be doing. And the other thing is, there's a lot of people out there that don't realize they're on the same path, right? The Web3 folks don't realize that they're on the same path of other people that have traditionally been working toward access to knowledge, access to information, preserving those things for perpetuity. And those folks are librarians, our local newspapers, our local public radio stations and public television stations. Many of those people in those jobs have the same mission. They just haven't yet recognized that this technology is a pathway and a tool for them to continue that mission. And the technologists building this stuff haven't quite realized, because maybe they got some resistance, or maybe they got some misunderstanding, and they feel like there's an adversarial nature to everything traditional. And those folks just need time. A lot of people need that time and exposure to realize where those synergies are. And also, some people need to be allowed to be where they are and don't need to be pushed. So there's a lot we can do together, and there's a lot we can do for each other. And I would just encourage people to reach out and engage in those conversations and find that common ground.
Yeah, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, it is about education. It's understanding that the technology is constantly evolving. It's very hard even for those of us in the community to keep up with the various new tech, but it is about reading, research, networking, speaking with people, not being afraid to ask the questions. I know Blockchain Legal Institute is a centralized library of decentralized resources, just like you said, because of the fact that we are all over the place, and it's really hard sometimes to find the resources that we might need. So definitely, libraries are really important, and just like the government, GBA is important, because it's providing in multiple languages access to resources in a variety of communities, and definitely educating those, and providing tech support. There's various protocols who are members within the GBA, and they're doing development, hackathons, you name it. So it's very exciting. For those, again, who are listening to this, definitely like and subscribe, follow GBA on LinkedIn, follow, GBA on the YouTube side. All of it's very social. I know that we at times in the past, we've had in-person events. Now we're doing more live stream activities and events, both, monthly and more frequently. So definitely on LinkedIn, follow GBA, so that way you can kind of get into the ebb and flow of what the calendar is showing, and you can listen and learn, because that's really, if you're out there and you're watching streaming, you can also be listening to kind of the tech developments, because it's amazing how we are not even aware sometimes of the tech that we're using, and that's integrating, the various life that we live. So, it's an amazing life that we are in. I want to thank you for being on. I know we're going to have many more conversations, both from the insurance perspective as well as some of the other working groups that you're becoming involved with. And for everyone, who is on today, thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for future spotlights because we have, oh my gosh, over 500 people that I'm going to be trying to spotlight and highlight and tell their story. So if you are within the GBA and you're listening and you haven't been interviewed yet, reach out so we can talk to you. Everyone, have a great day and we will chat later. Bye.
Thank you, Jackie.